How do you feel about same? No? One question, sir? Okay. All right.
Okay, Don, can I dance with you?
Oh, yeah, you can dance with me.
Donald Cortez Cornelius was not just a television show host and a producer. He was an entrepreneur, a man that left a legacy for many people to follow. But behind the smiles for the paparazzi and the scintillating character that showed up when the directors say, lights, camera, action, there were some dark secrets behind the man. Following his death, his son confirmed some very dark rumors about his father that left the world in shock. Watch this video to find out the dark rumors confirmed by Don Cornelius's son and the secrets that the man held. But before we get into those confirmed rumors, we need to uncover the early events in the life of Don Cornelius that led to the buildup of these rumors. Early life and career. Donald Cortez Cornelius was born on the 27th of September, 1936, on the south side of Chicago, Illinois, and he was raised in the Bronzeville neighborhood of the area. He attended DuSable High School and graduated in the year 1954 before joining the United States Marine Corps. He spent 18 months serving in the United States Marine Corps during the Korean War. During his short time in the military, Don Cornelius worked several jobs. These jobs would include selling tires, automobiles, and insurance, and he also operated as an officer for the Chicago Police Department. Despite him being married and already having 2 sons, and to top it off having just $400 in his bank account, he decided to quit his day job in the year 1966 to take on a 3-month broadcasting course. In the same year, just when he looked like he was making the wrong decisions, Don Cornelius managed to get a job as an announcer, a news reporter, and also as a disc jockey, all in the WVON radio station. In the year 1967, Don Cornelius joined the television station known as WCIU-TV, where he was the host of a certain news program that was known as A Black's View of the News. On the same television station, he managed to launch Soul Train in the year 1970 as a daily show. The following year, Soul Train managed to enter national syndication, and so it was able to move to Los Angeles. During the national debut of Soul Train, great celebrities such as Gladys Knight and the Pips and Eddie Kendricks, among others, were featured. Don Cornelius was originally a magistrate who was also inspired by the civil rights movement. After a brief investigation, he made a discovery that in the United States there were very few television venues for soul music in the late 1960s. During this time, he would make many of the African-American musicians widely known as these musicians would appear on Soul Train. This made Soul Train to be very influential in the African-American community, as well as increasing its popularity within a wider audience. Don Cornelius was the writer, the producer, as well as the host of Soul Train. Due to this, Cornelius became a key figure in the exposure of many African-American musicians such as Aretha Franklin, Marvin Gaye, James Brown, and also Michael Jackson. He was also very instrumental in the creation of opportunities for some of the talented dancers at that time, as he had set a precedent for some of the TV dance programs that came after. Cornelius would describe Soul Train saying, "We had a show that kids gravitated to." According to Spike Lee, Soul Train was an urban music time capsule. Don Cornelius was one of the pioneers of the Black is Beautiful campaign. The reason for this is because, as the creator of Soul Train, he was the man in charge of showing the African American people in a whole different way. They were able to be seen in a new light. Don Cornelius brought about change in the world of entertainment, especially when it involved the African American entertainers. Here is why. Before the creation of Soul Train, the African American entertainers were not getting very many opportunities to perform on TV, and when they did, it was mostly through guest appearances on shows that were owned and ran by the whites. But Soul Train brought in that missing piece, that one thing that was not in the industry for a very long time, a platform that resonates with the African American people. It did more than just bringing the talented African American musicians and dancers on television. It showcased the culture and the way of life. The thing with Soul Train is that it was not just focused on African American people. At that time, there were white people who were very much attracted by the show. As a matter of fact, the show continued gaining more and more white audiences until it eventually had a very huge following. Don Cornelius had a very smooth but deep voice, as well as a nice afro hairstyle. Although, as the changes in the hairstyle's tastes came about, he had to swing with the flow of the changes. But there was one thing that Don Cornelius was always known for, and that was the catchphrase that he always used when closing the show. The phrase was something like this: "And you can bet your last money, it's all gonna be a stone gas, honey. I'm Don Cornelius, and as always in parting, we wish you love, peace, and soul." After Don Cornelius left Soul Train as the host, the catchphrase that he used to do was changed and made a little shorter. It was something like this: "And as always, we wish you love, peace, and soul." This new catchphrase was the one that was being used especially in most of the recent new episodes that came in the year 2006. As much as he had a closing catchphrase, he also had an introductory phrase. The phrase that he would often use was something like this: "We got another sound coming out of Philly that's a sure enough dilly." But Don Cornelius was not just in the music business, as he also had some roles in the film industry too. A good example was his role in the comedy film known as Tapeheads that was released in 1988. In this film, he was playing the role of Mo Fuzz, a record producer. He also appeared in the 1987 film known as The Return of Bruno. In this film, he was playing a fictional role of himself. The Return of Bruno was actually a mockumentary film. It mocked the return of a certain fictional singer by the name Bruno Radolini, who is portrayed in this film by Bruce Willis. In the film, Don Cornelius is seen as a host of a certain funk gospel show that is in Detroit, that is known as Bless My Soul. As the host of the show, he gets to offer Bruno the chance to return to the stage one more time, but this time with a duet together with the Temptations. The last time that Don Cornelius appeared on TV was when he was in a certain episode in the television series known as Unsung. This appearance of Don Cornelius featured the music group known as Full Force, and it was aired approximately 2 days before his death. Controversies. In the month of October 2008, Don Cornelius was chilling at his home on Mulholland Drive in Los Angeles, California, when the police came to arrest him and charge him with felony domestic violence. Upon reaching the precinct, Don Cornelius was released on bail. The following month, in November 2008, Don Cornelius appeared in court and his case was heard. On this day, when he was first brought to court, Don Cornelius was charged with spousal abuse as well as dissuading a witness from trying to file a police report. A month later, in December 2008, Don Cornelius appeared in court once again. This time, he made his plea, and he pleaded not guilty to the charge of spousal abuse. His wife was known as Victoria Avila Cornelius, or Victoria Chapman, and she was a Russian model. Victoria had obtained 2 restraining orders on Don Cornelius, and Cornelius was banned from going anywhere near her. The following year, in March 2009, Don Cornelius changed the initial plea of not guilty that he had made in December 2008 to plead no contest. After changing his plea, Don Cornelius was put under probation for 36 months. The television network A&E made a documentary miniseries that was titled Secrets of Playboy in the year 2022 that talked about Don Cornelius. In this documentary miniseries, there were accusations against Don Cornelius stating that he used to act inappropriately towards 2 Playboy bunnies back in the 1970s. According to the accusations, these 2 women were taken to the house of Don Cornelius, where they had to stay for 3 consecutive days. During those 3 days, these women were locked in different rooms, and they were not allowed to leave. They were also forced against their will to take some illegal substances unknowingly that altered the normal functioning of their bodies. Apart from that, Don Cornelius used to force himself on these 2 women. The Soul Train Effect. The success of the Don Cornelius brand of Soul Train was not standing well with everyone. There were some people here and there that were not feeling very well with the rise of the show. It was either that they had something against the show, or they just did not like the creator of the show. One of these people was a man by the name Dick Clark. Mr. Clark was a man who was well known for running the television for teens for quite some time with his Lily White American Bandstand. According to him, he thought that Soul Train should not be on TV, and that it should be taken off air, and as replacement, he would offer his own knockoff known as Soul Unlimited. A certain author by the name Nelson George wrote a book that was titled The Hippest Trip in America, Soul Train, where he wrote in the book saying the following: "The impact of Soul Train on the television landscape was not lost on Dick Clark. By 1973, Clark was no longer just cherry-picking talent from Soul Train, but actively trying to co-opt Cornelius's franchise by launching his own black-themed dance show, Soul Unlimited." On the amateurish copycat version of Soul Train, by Dick Clark known as Soul Unlimited, there was a special episode that was launched in this version. The author Nelson George goes ahead to comment on the special where he wrote the following: "Clark's power in the record and television industry, including the backing of ABC, this ripoff could have proved fatal to Cornelius's dream. The move by Dick Clark to try and oust Soul Train was not well received by many African-American politicians, and also the entire African-American community in general. This is because the African-American community saw Soul Train to be very cool, and apart from that, they saw it was a nice extension to the fight for civil rights. Due to the unrest in the African-American community, they decided to contact both Clark and the ABC network. In this cause, they were led by Chicago's Reverend Jesse Jackson. Nelson George, the author, also wrote on this issue saying, "The idea that Clark, with whom blacks had always had an uneasy relationship, could kill Soul Train led to threats of an ABC boycott. The African-American leaders got support from one of the most powerful people when it came to the African-American music business. This was none other than Clarence Avant. Clarence was also a consultant to ABC, and he was filled with rage when he heard about the move that was been cooked by Dick Clark. Later on, Dick Clark invited Clarence Avant as he wanted him to endorse his show. But Clarence was not for the idea. Clarence talked about his meeting with Dick Clark, where he said the following words: "Clark wanted my okay. He wanted me to endorse his idea. I freaked out. If you do this, there's no Don Cornelius. We had just gotten free enough to have something on TV. I told Dick Clark no, I would not endorse his show." After realizing the dark intentions of Dick Clark, Clarence Avant went even further on his quest to stop Clark. He arranged a meeting with the top executives at ABC. This meeting also included the founder and chairperson of ABC, Leonard Goldenson, as well as the president of ABC, Eldon H. Rule. Later on, Clarence Avant received a threatening message from Clark's representatives, William Morris Agency, telling Clarence to stay out of their business. But being the powerful figure when it comes to the African-American music business, Clarence Avant could not be intimidated by any threats coming from Dick Clark's camp. When Don Cornelius knew what Dick Clark was up to, he decided that he would never speak to him ever again. As a result of the back-and-forth fight between Dick Clark's camp and the Soul Train's camp, Dick Clark's Soul Unlimited came crumbling down. Don Cornelius had a nice vision for Soul Train. He knew that this would be a platform where African-American dancers and musicians would get to be seen on TV with the dancers grooving to jazz, funk, R&B, disco, and gospel music. Don Cornelius once told Nelson George the following words: "The key ingredient for the success of Soul Train was that it's very solidly based on black music. These were the best dance records made for our beginning period, our second decade, our third decade, and any future decades. The best dance records made during those periods were black records, made by black artists, black singers, black musicians. The best dance music was our folks. We just played the best dance records possible." Here is a fun fact about Soul Train, the famous signature move that Michael Jackson used to do, known as moonwalk, actually originated from Soul Train. The dance was actually a copy of the backslide dance that was done by the Electric Boogaloos on Soul Train. Then Michael Jackson adopted the move, and it became a global dancing style. Soul Train was a very big success that many of the biggest artists just wanted to be on it. Some of these artists included great names such as James Brown, Marvin Gaye, Al Green, Stevie Wonder, Patti LaBelle, Smokey Robinson, Melvin Harold, the Blue Notes, and Elton John. The show would bring together so many people with different skills in the art of music and dancing. The artists just loved the moves that the dancers were making, and they always wanted to be on the show to get a first-hand glimpse of the dancers doing their thing. Artists like Smokey Robinson and Marvin Gaye even wrote songs which were inspired by some of the Soul Train dancers. In the case of Marvin Gaye, he wrote the song "I Want You," which was inspired by a certain Soul Train dancer who was called Jan, and the two would later get married. The famous song by Smokey Robinson, "The Agony and the Ecstasy," was inspired by a Soul Train dancer. Don Cornelius had a hard time managing some of the things that were on Soul Train. These things included trying to manage the age limit of some of the dancers in Soul Train so that these dancers may not end up having affairs with the artists. And so he would prefer that the underage dancers would not be allowed on the show. Soul Train also encouraged different people, including the straight ones and the gay ones, as some of the dancers on Soul Train were actually gay. Don Cornelius had no problem with the dancers being gay. As a matter of fact, he encouraged the gay culture to the masses. A certain dancer by the name Jody Watley once said the following words to the author Nelson George in regards to the gay thing in Soul Train. Soul Train had an obvious black male gay culture going on, and for that reason, the show was also quite forward. Don allowed everyone to be themselves on camera. Some of the dance moves that are currently being done by people nowadays actually come from the gay clubs in Soul Train. One of the famous dancers who were in Soul Train, Tyrone Proctor, brought back some of the dance moves to music videos of the songs done by Lady Gaga. The dance move, which is commonly known as the bump, also happened to originate from Soul Train. While still a teenager at the age of 19, Rosie Perez once showcased her skills as she rocked some moves on Soul Train when she came to Los Angeles from Brooklyn. Rosie Perez was a very good dancer, and she was very first with her moves. She even stole the spotlight from her early days at Soul Train. She was so good that some of the dancers at that time did not like her at first. But as much as she was a good dancer, there were some dance moves that she used to do that did not go well with the show. But her entire performance was really good. Rosie Perez would recall her days in Soul Train where she had a lot to say, as she said the following: "Don Cornelius did not want to see how I really danced. I was doing hip-hop, and it was foreign to people out in California. They only knew about popping and locking, so they were not keen on hip-hop dancing. Then I had to dance in high heels, and I never danced in high heels before, and I had this little tiny short dress, and it's riding up my ass, and I'm like, oh my God, I couldn't move. The first couple of times, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I was just excited and nervous and scared and just elated. That was my style, a bunch of nerves just oozing out of my body." Don Cornelius had a plan for Rosie Perez that was more than just being a dancer on the show. He wanted her to join a certain vocal trio that he was forming at that time. But even after he had taken Rosie for dinner, she was still not in for the idea that Don Cornelius was offering her. Apparently, that happened to be her last time on Soul Train, and she was never seen on Soul Train again. But she still was not done. She later on, after some years, visited Soul Train, only that this time she was not in front of the camera. She was dancing by herself somewhere in the corner. Luckily for her, she was spotted by a record company executive, and that was when things would start changing for her. She was given a job at the record company as a choreographer, and her role was to teach the musicians who came to record there how to dance. Rosie Perez would later recall on her journey to become a professional choreographer, where she said the following words: "That was the beginning of my choreography career. That's how it all started. It started from Soul Train." Jody Watley, who was also a Grammy Award winner, began her career in the entertainment industry as a Soul Train dancer. She was 14 years old when she first went to Soul Train, as a very ambitious young girl who wanted to thrive in the entertainment industry. After being on the show for a consecutive run of 3 years, she finally received her light. She auditioned for a certain record label, and just like that, another Soul Train star was born. She passed the audition with the record label, and that is how she started her recording career. Jody Watley would speak about her time at Soul Train, where she said the following: "You just have to be fearless, not really minding if you might be ridiculed for wearing something. You're not afraid to be who you really are." Soul Train was just producing celebrities after celebrities. But here is the shocker: Nick Cannon, the one from Wild 'N Out, and the husband to Mariah Carey. Nick is also a product of Soul Train. According to Nick Cannon, he actually came out of the womb watching Soul Train. He was also a dancer at Soul Train. Somewhere in the early 1980s, Don Cornelius was diagnosed with a certain life-threatening condition that attacked the blood vessels near his brain. In the month of November 1982, Cornelius underwent a medical procedure for 21 hours straight. 6 months after the surgery, Cornelius was back at Soul Train. Later on, after running the show for some time, Don Cornelius married the former Miss Ukraine, Victoria Chapman. By the year 2006, Don Cornelius knew that it was his time to leave the game. Don Cornelius called Clarence Avant and informed him about his decision. In the spring of 2008, Don Cornelius decided that he will sell Soul Train. At that time, he was 71 years old, and he sold Soul Train and became a richer man. Death. On the 1st of February 2012, at around 4 a.m. PST, there was a shooting that was heard coming from the house of Donald Cortez Cornelius. The police were alarmed about the shooting, and so they rushed to the man's house in Los Angeles. Don Cornelius was found wounded in his house, and so he was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. But the moment that he reached Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, Don Cornelius was pronounced dead. He was 75 years old, he had seen it all, lived it all. After an autopsy was done on his body, there was a shocking discovery that was made that no one knew anything about. Apparently, for the past 15 years of his life, Don Cornelius had been suffering from seizures. The reason behind his seizures was the 21-hour-long surgery that he had had way back in 1982. That was when people realized that ever since Don Cornelius underwent that surgery in 1982, he had never been the same. As a matter of fact, it was due to that surgery that he decided that he would no longer host Soul Train from 1993. It was said by Shamar Moore that Don Cornelius might have been suffering from dementia during the last 6 months of his life. But following his death, his son confirmed that the gunshot wound that led to his death was actually self-inflicted. He said that his father once called him and said the following words: "I don't know how much longer I can take this."